Hello, my name is Mark. I'd like to talk to you a little bit about embodied practice, following on some work that I've done with Professor Elvira Perez from Nottingham Biomedical Research Centre for Mental Health Technology and Technology. So we wrote a recent book chapter looking at embodied practice and its benefits in consideration of trauma survivors. So an embodied practice can be anything from yoga, dance, tai chi, right the way through to making a cup of tea. An embodied practice is anything that promotes the connection between the body and the mind, therapeutically. The work follows on from Van der Kolk, The Body Keeps the Score. Van der Kolk taught us about how trauma resides in the body and in the primitive part of the brain, and that trauma survivors often exist within a state of hyper or hypoarousal, with a continuous smoke alarm sounding in the mind, keeping that hypervigilance and hyper-awareness. So Van der Kolk also talks about yoga for trauma recovery. Yoga has multiple benefits. It slows the endocritic system, cleans the endocritic system, as well as promoting emotional well-being. Yoga means yoke, union, bringing together, so perfect as an embodied practice, and runs off the basic principle of ahimsa, which is non-violence to the self, but also non-violence to others. However, yoga can be challenging. Yoga requires, at some point, for a quiet mind, which it can be difficult for trauma survivors. Patanjali in the sutras describes yoga chitta vritti nirodha, which means calming the fluctuations of the mind stuff. But you have to be ready for that. Obviously, there are trauma-sensitive principles that run all the way through, but yoga can be difficult. It's not for everybody. And I don't mean in terms of flexibility, but I do mean in terms of that quietening of the mind. So I started to think about martial arts. Okay, some background briefly. I'll try not to go on too much, but many years ago, I worked in a detox program that I set up with my brother, and part of the aftercare, we were taking people off to the gym to box and to train in general. And what we noticed is that the people that did engage with the boxing were getting much better outcomes. Now, we thought that was just replacing one high with another. The lesser of two evils, but that's what we thought we were doing. Then I started many years later. I worked for a woman's charity, trying to break the cycle of child removal. So a woman gives birth, the child's on child protection and is removed, she gets pregnant, and we go through the whole cycle again and again and again. Now, 98% of the women involved in that program had experienced domestic abuse. They were engaged for 18 months, so we had, plenty of time to do some good work. I remembered the work in a detox program, so I started a boxing club for the women, and noticed when they came in through the door how they were. They wore the trauma, the abuse, like a dirty overcoat, a really heavy overcoat that they were weighed down by. Now, if trauma resides in the body, boxing rewrites that narrative that we hold, the narrative we hold about oneself. Through controlled aggression and managing what is perceived as danger, the practitioner changes that story and starts to progress from a trauma victim to a trauma survivor and beyond. Now their bodies are producing oxytocin, that's guaranteed. Cannabinoids, these help the mind to support the body in alleviating some of these, changing this trauma narrative. If trauma resides in the body and in the primitive brain, and talking therapies sort of operates more on the rational brain, you've got to ask yourself, why are we not using more embodied practice to support trauma recovery? For many people, martial arts, especially boxing, is much more accessible than yoga. Yoga can be perceived as a privileged activity, but more importantly, it requires that calmness of mind, which you may not have, you may not be ready for. I've always said that martial arts is yoga for beginners, and I teach kickboxing and I teach yoga. We've got evidence, a body of evidence growing. In 2023, Bozdorov released a paper looking at the benefits more generally of boxing in terms of mental health. It's a really interesting read. But the fact is, there needs to be more research done. If trauma resides in the body, then the way to treat trauma is through the body. Tailored package that allows practitioner to rewrite that narrative, to change the story of the self, and to progress from trauma survivor to, well, beyond. What I would like to do is to look in more detail at the brain, to work alongside colleagues in neurobiology and see what's going on in the brain, what is happening from day one of boxing and the way through to maybe, I don't know how long we can do the study for, but I'd like to see a longitudinal study done so we can understand really what is happening. Thank you for listening, and goodbye.